So I thought, get someone who's in the mix of things. And so I've asked Erik Milito. He's a vice president for upstream and industry operations for the American Petroleum Institute. His work covers regulatory legislative matters related to domestic exploration and production, including access to domestic and oil, natural gas, onshore and off. He's worked from a legal standpoint with gas leasing and royalties. And he's also an Army veteran, so and he spent time as a prosecutor, defense attorney, and as a command advisor, and he has worked with the Department of Interior. So, Erik, I appreciate you calling in. I'm hoping you can fill us in. You've heard what I've introduced about, what the effort's been with Explore Offshore. But can you tell us what's going on in Washington and how it's going to impact what we're doing, what we'd like to do here?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Thanks for having me. Great to talk to you. It's really an exciting time when it comes to offshore oil and natural gas development in the United States. Most people don't recognize or appreciate how important it is because if you look at what's happening in the Gulf of Mexico, our country is actually producing more oil in the Gulf of Mexico than it ever has, and that's key for many reasons. It's providing us with affordable supplies for consumers. It's creating a geopolitical advantage for us, whereby by producing that close to 2 million barrels a day out of the Gulf of Mexico, it reduces our dependence on places like Russia, Iran, that generally use energy as a geopolitical tool. And one thing a lot of people don't know about it, creates huge revenues for the federal government as well as state and local governments. And if you look at what's happened for those coastal states that get to share in the revenues, in 2019, Alabama got more than 30 million, Louisiana more than 94 million, Mississippi more than 31 million, Texas over 58 million. And then there's also money going to the Land and Water Conservation Fund, where every state gets money for conservation efforts. That all comes from offshore oil and gas development. So we are now one of the top 5 offshore producers in the world. But for us to maintain that status as a global energy power, we can't just sit back and just restrict ourselves to the Western and Central Gulf. We're going to run out of that, and we're going to need new places to look. And as you've indicated, it really comes down to get out there and do the research, the scientific research, to see what those rocks look like and see what those reserves might be. So from the government standpoint, we're hopeful that we're going to get approvals that are going to be coming out so that we can get boats on the water and do some of the seismic research, the scientific research, to see what the geology looks like. That is still moving forward, and we're hopeful that will happen. That type of data is actually needed so that companies can get out there and determine if they're going to get leases, which are there for the purpose of then going out there and drilling some wells to see if we actually have the oil and gas and then actually producing it. But that is over a long time frame, 5, 10, 15, 20 years. But to actually get out there and have a company get a lease, you have to have a leasing program in place under the law. It's called the Outer Continental Shelf Leasing Program, and they cover 5 years. And this current one is going to end at the end of June of 2022. So this current administration, with Secretary Bernhardt, now is considering what the next one should look like, the one that will run from 2022 to 2027. And there was some talk about moving it up and trying to put a new one in place starting this year, but I think they ran out of time. And as you said, there have been some court decisions that put some of this into question, but the court decisions really should be working independently of this planning document, because all we're talking about is a planning document, and then later on the government actually determine whether or not to lease this acreage or rent areas offshore to the oil and gas industry. But think about that. A company decides, we want to see what's out there. So we're going to do that, we need to get a lease. When you do that, you're paying at least $250,000 for the right to have this lease, this rental agreement for 10 years. Some of these leases actually go for $100 million. And then when you have it, you're paying rentals, even if you're not doing anything on it. So more money's coming into the government. And then if you're actually producing oil or gas, you're then paying royalties on it. And this is a major revenue source for the government. It's probably the second leading revenue source behind the IRS collecting taxes. And that's the type of funding that could come into a state like Virginia and give it additional opportunities to pay for roads and infrastructure and things like that if the the Congress would say, yeah, we want everybody to get this revenue sharing. But beyond that, we know that there's significant tax revenues coming in to the state through this activity, through state and local taxes, and our estimates are it could be $150 million a year. So this is a huge opportunity. It provides major benefits for the country in giving us stable supplies of U.S. oil and natural gas, but it also provides huge local impacts when it comes to revenues, jobs, and it creates a ripple effect throughout the economy where you're just kind of boosting what's happening in education and in all industries, hotels, restaurants. Companies come in and provide your safety gear and things like that, transportation. You need all that to support offshore development, and it's a long time to do that, but we need to start making these decisions now.
Well, you mentioned the revenue that the state can make, and I went down to Port Fourchon and saw the number of companies that were right there in that community, if you will, industrial community. It was company after company after company, and undoubtedly that by itself, they are bringing revenue in, and we could see those types of things here. But getting back to the royalty aspect of it, that's just not a guaranteed, I don't think, though. There's some steps that we as a state would have to go through. I don't know how much, if Congress does it. I know our two senators, Kane and Warner, at one point came out in favor of offshore exploration and potential drilling, and when there was talk of royalties, and then under the Obama ban, they've kind of turned against it now, and so would we automatically be would those royalties automatically be available, or are there some steps that our own senators would have to take to make that happen?
Yeah, the Congress would have to take action. So what happened that helped out the Gulf Coast states in 2006, they passed the Gulf of Mexico Energy Security Act, and through that legislation, they granted revenue sharing to those Gulf coastal states. We've been pushing to expand that to any state that is coastal to offshore oil and gas development, and it would take some leadership. It would take, the Virginia delegation to get out there and say, this would be a good thing. Let's just make it happen, get it on the books so that if someday it ever happens, we'll be guaranteed that money. But the other thing that's been done recently is a study was done by Kalish, which is an international economic energy consulting firm, and they went and looked at the amount of revenue that would just flow from this based on the business activity in the state of Virginia, and the actual money coming in that would come in, regardless of the revenue sharing, the royalty sharing aspect, would be a huge amount of money coming into the tax base through state, local taxes, real estate taxes, everything that you see generated from that state and local level from just business activity. And some of the estimates coming from that report are showing up to $150 million a year coming in to the state. So it's not small, and I think when you're looking at education infrastructure, it could be very helpful. And I'm looking here, Virginia's projected to see the third highest levels of spending if you have oil and gas development on the Atlantic coast, and thus state and local tax revenues would be reaching around $160 million by the end of the forecast period. So there's a lot of opportunities here for revenue to flow in. We've seen areas throughout the Atlantic just getting kind of resurrected from an economic standpoint. If you look offshore Canada, not far from our own coastline, Newfoundland and Labrador, there's a town there called St. John, and they said it was near extinction, but the oil and gas industry came in and kind of brought it back to life, and it's a vibrant economy now because of the investment that's come through. So you can see that in coastal communities where we operate.
Well, of course, in order to be able to do any of that, any extraction whatsoever, and really build the industry here, we get back to the first phase of this is exploration. And obviously, I have had the opportunity to go out and talk with probably dozens of groups by this point and talk about the Explore Offshore initiative and what was involved and the technology that was used. And obviously, you're going to get certain amount of pushback. They're talking about safety towards the marine life. And I've addressed this many times, even here on the radio station, on the John Fredericks Radio Show, talking about the technology that's used for that, the studies that have been done both through private and government entities, even under the Obama administration. The head of BOEM, the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, had stated before Congress that all that research, and there's been no documented evidence that there's been any substantial endangerment to marine life. The other aspect of that, though, is cost. It oftentimes get ask, well, who's going to pay for this exploration? Is our tax dollars going to this? So tell me, what exploration is going on today, and who's paying for it?
Yeah, this is completely invested by the private sector, and what we're talking about here is scientific research. It's geology at its core, because companies are going out to see what the rocks below the ocean floor look like, to see if they may contain oil and natural gas. This type of research is scientific research. It's conducted by universities. It's conducted by the government. It's conducted for many purposes. This type of research is used for placing wind turbines offshore. It's for understanding what the faults look like, in that geology below the ocean floor, what lava flows look like. When I'm working with my fifth and sixth graders, and talking to my kids about the OCS in their lessons, this is precisely the type of research that allows them to learn and get the education on what our outer continental shelf looks like. It's funny, because I'm talking to you about this, and I'm sitting at home, and we're talking about the same thing. It's because this is science, and what you have is decades of experience by this industry in conducting these surveys all around the world. And there having been no evidence of any kind of impacts on marine mammals. But putting that aside, the government has put in place significant mitigation measures to ensure that no mammals are even exposed in any way to this type of activity. So it's an experience of the industry carrying out scientific research that has led to no impacts based on everything we've seen, and it's a federal government that's putting in place requirements to make sure you ramp up slowly. So if the mammals in the area hear the sounds that are coming, they can disperse. You have observers on board, and you have extra monitoring that's called passive acoustic monitoring that's used to see if there are any mammals in the area. So it's very safe when it comes to the ecosystem, and it enables us to really learn about what our geology in our U.S. outer continental shelf looks like, so that we can make decisions, and so that the government has information and can tell the story about our geology.
Well, I appreciate you coming on and talking about it. There's a lot of questions folks have. They get information. A lot of times things that have been proven false again and again still get just regurgitated in the papers and on the news. If people want to find out more about what really the technology is, what enhancements the industry has made in safety and technology and all that, where can they find out more information?
Well, you can go to exploreoffshore.com. You can go to api.org, and if you're looking specifically at the seismic research, it's the International Association of Geophysical Contractors. It's iagc.org. So there's a lot of good information out there on that particular aspect of operations where you're doing the scientific research. But getting beyond that, we've been out there, and this is a high-tech, innovative industry, and a lot of people don't realize this. I didn't realize this until I did some of the research over the past few years, but we as a world, we're consuming and producing 100 million barrels a day. That's where consumption is. Go back to 1970, the world was consuming 48 million barrels of oil a day. Today it's 100 million barrels of oil a day, and about 30% of that comes from the offshore. So this technology, these operations are advancing in a way that others would have never imagined, but it's happening in many respects outside the U.S., Brazil, Venezuela, Saudi Arabia, all around the world. You see, they're not far from here, Canada. They've done exploration outside of Cuba, West Africa. But this is an area where the U.S. has been a leader, and we should be a leader, and we should be out there advancing these technologies and using American ingenuity in places like the Deepwater Atlantic, which, as you stated, is 40, 50 miles or more, maybe 100 miles, and if we find out where it is, off the coastline, well out of the sight line, and well out of the way of a lot of the commercial work that's done in fishing and the military and things like that.
Well, look, I appreciate your time on here. This is Erik Milito. He's Vice President Upstream and Industry Operations for the American Petroleum Institute. I hope you'll keep us informed, and folks will be able to check out the exploreoffshore.com and iagc.org and American Petroleum Institute. Just Google it. You'll find it, and hopefully it will answer some of your questions. Erik, thanks for your time this morning. I appreciate you being on, and we'll hope to talk to you soon.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks for all you do, and have a great summer.